Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم علمنا ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. صلى الله على سيدنا Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So alhamdulillah, like Ustaz Jalaluddin said, we're now reached our 8th session, and inshallah we'll complete this in 9 sessions. So we are now on page 78. So this is on a chapter called The Logic of Slavehood, which is followed by the chapter Logic of Love. And this is what I would like to cover today, inshallah. Now, if you flip back to page 77, at the bottom of the page, the Imam says, rahimahullah, he says, why does the slave ignore the fact that he is a slave when he knows that ignoring it does not change anything about his slavehood to him? So this is the obvious question. You cannot escape the fact that you are Allah's slave. In the same way, you cannot escape death. This is something that's inevitable. It's just reality. There's nothing you can do about it. You can try. You think like, okay, I can ignore it. I can try to rebel against it, but it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anything. And this is, again, if you think about it, this is something that we should be thinking about when we talk to people who are not Muslim and we're trying to bring them to Islam, is, try to hammer that point home to them. I mean, maybe they're not ready to talk about slavehood, but maybe say, listen, you are going to die, right? That's no one's going to deny that. People might argue with you about, does Allah exist and am I his slave? But people, for example, they cannot argue about death. They say, okay, you are going to die. That's inevitable. That's an inescapable fact. What have you prepared for it? What have you researched about it? What happens when you die? Is there life after death? So this is what the question that Imam is getting at, is that you cannot get out of the fact that you are his slave. So, and then he goes on to say that out of Allah's grace and favor that he's bestowed upon you, that you are rewarded when you acknowledge your slavehood to him, right? You are rewarded when you acknowledge your slavehood to him. And this is part of the beautiful relationship that you have with Allah, is that you always fall back on the fact that you are his slave. For example, a few days ago, I was having a discussion with some students in another class, and we were talking about sajdat al-shukr. We were talking about sajdat al-shukr, like the gratefulness prostration. And someone asked, okay, well, can I do sajdat al-shukr for something that I deem as small? Could I do sajdat al-shukr just because, I was able to get a meal or something like that, or something, some light matter came about? And the answer is, well, why not? Because you are absolutely helpless. As Allah's slave, you are absolutely 100% helpless. You can't do anything without Allah's tawfiq, without Allah's idhn. Nothing happens without Allah. And it's in the same way, and you think the reverse of that, such as the shukr, you're grateful for something that happens. You're grateful to Allah when something happens that you want it to happen. You think the flip side is, look at your du'as, right? Like when you make du'a, there's no du'a that is too small or too insignificant or too paltry or too trivial to make to Allah, because again, you are absolutely helpless and Allah has power over all things. And when you do that, to come back to the Imam's point, when you do that, when you ask Allah for everything, and when you show gratitude to Allah for everything, big or small, you are manifesting your slavehood, right? You're reminding yourself and you're showing Allah that you understand that you are his slave. You cannot do anything without him. So he says you are rewarded for that. But and then on the flip side is that obviously if you do not acknowledge this and you do not carry out his commands and rulings, that doesn't take anything away from him. That doesn't diminish his kingdom or his ownership in any way. You can pretend that you're not Allah's slave, but that's not going to affect Allah at all. So people, I remember I was teaching some kids at a school a long time ago in the UK, and I was like trying to hammer this point home to them. They're teenagers, or they're at that age where they're just learning how to pray. And I had to say, listen, you have to understand that Allah doesn't need your prayer. Allah doesn't need you to pray Salat al-Asr. That it doesn't affect him either way. You need Salat al-Asr. You need Salat al-Dhuhr. You need to fast. It's for your benefit. It's like you can't. There's nothing you can do to Allah to harm Allah, because Allah is Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Imam goes on, he says, Allah tests you with trials and he rewards you to see if you're patient. He tests you with all kinds of blessings to see if you're grateful. Adversity surrounds you, and then he pours bliss and ease into your heart if you've grasped this fact and believe in it. So again, we've discussed this many times before. This is what it all boils down to, that as a slave, you're patient with trials and tests, and you're grateful with blessings and ease. And once you understand that, then all these things, whatever happens to you, especially adversities, Allah puts ease and bliss into your heart. You're able to bear it because you understand the reality. You can sit back, you can, some people like to say that take the 40,000-foot view, but you can sort of detach yourself from the situation you're in, and you can say, okay, this is a tribulation, this is ease, this is a tribulation. So you understand, okay, this because Allah has sent me tribulation, the command is to be patient. Allah has sent me something good, some blessings, some ni'mah. The command is to be grateful, and therefore you don't have this idea where, again, a lot of people do, especially people who are Muslim. Well, they're always waiting for life to be perfect. They're always expecting, okay, I just have to get over this one problem, and then everything will be fine in my life. And then something else happens. Okay, if I just get over this problem, then everything will be fine in my life. It's like, no, you don't get it. There's always going to be something. There's always going to be something. So as a Muslim, yeah, if you want to be clever about it, you think, okay, once you've solved the problem, once you've got over some hiccup or some trial that you were going through, and you've resolved the matter, you should go on the lookout. Okay, so that tribulation is done. Where is the next one? Right? Be ready for it. Instead of thinking, oh, problem solved, now I'm in the clear. It's like, no, you're not in the clear, because that's the nature of the dunya. There's going to be something else that comes along, and that helps you to be in the right frame of mind, so you're not, taken aback or shocked when something else bad happens. So, and then Allah quotes the verse in Surah Al-Baqarah 155-157, right? And I shared it with you as well on the group. I put up there on the group, because this is really important, because Allah says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ أَمْوَالِ الْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. So Allah says, we will definitely test you, right? We will definitely test you. And this is a really, really important point to make, because you want to break down the Arabic. You've got the lam of Tawqid, you have the Nun Thaqila. I could have translated that as, we will most assuredly definitely test you without doubt, right? There's a lot of emphasis in that sentence, in that basic expression. All right, we will definitely test you. But then Allah says, with something, be shay'in, and that's part of Allah's mercy, that He says that, be shay'in. He says a part, like something of fear and hunger and loss of wealth and life and fruits, something, right? But not complete. Allah's not going to test you with all of it, but a part of these things. And as we're going to read on later in this chapter, once you understand that ayah, there's two ways to understand it. Number one, you're always going to have trials and tribulations, right? Unless you're in the state of istidraj, na'udhu billah. And at the same time, is you don't have to look for trials and tribulations. That's the flip side, understanding that you don't have to go look for them, right? The trials and tribulations will come your way. Now, and the Imam's going to talk about this after a couple of pages. So then he says, thus Allah decrees for slaves according to the law of trial and tribulation, and that is one of His rights as their owner. Okay, and he has prescribed for Himself that He will show mercy and give them reward, and that is from His favor and grace towards them. So again, the point here on page 79, that is from His favor and grace towards them. Again, because Allah owns you, He owns all of us. That means He doesn't owe us anything. He has no obligation towards us. So we're not, again, we've discussed this before, we're not in this sort of we're not in like some sort of commerce with Allah or some sort of trade where it's like, well, I do the good deeds and you be the paradise, right? Because it is the idea that because I've done good deeds, that now you owe me this, right? You owe me some blessing, or you owe me the paradise, or you owe me the forgiveness of sins. Like, no, that's not the case. That's not the case at all. Because Allah owns you, He can do whatever He wants with you, and that's absolute justice, because you're His property. In the same way that anything I own, if I say I own this pencil, anything I do with it is effectively just because it's my pencil. Whether I use it, whether I give it away to someone, whether I sell it, whether I throw it in the bin, it doesn't matter because it's my pencil. I can do what I want with it. It's all just. If it were someone else's pencil, then yes, it would be considered injustice, but that's not the case here. And then, with the context of these verses on page 155, so the Baqarah 155 to 157, in the middle it says, those when disaster strikes them, they say, we belong to Allah and to Him we will return. Right? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Right? This is what you're supposed to say when tribulation hits you. Right? Not just for death, but anything. He's like, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. He says, now think about this, contemplate this exalted word or this statement. And I put a footnote in there. Obviously, the word kalima doesn't always mean like a literal word. It can mean a clause or a phrase or whatever. Right? In the same way in English, we say, can I have a word with you? Right? When you say to someone, I can have a word with you, it's never just one word. So when you understand to Allah we belong, this reminds you that you are Allah's slave. You are a commodity in His hands. A commodity has no say about anything, right? The same way I get the example of my pen. My pencil can't rebel against me. It has no say in the matter. It can't say, no, Mahdi, you're going to use me. Don't throw me in the bin. It's a commodity. I own it. And then it says, to Him we will return. And then here's the thing. To Him we will return. You remember that after your death, you go back to Allah. And therefore, everything that you went through in this life, every adversity, every hardship, every difficulty that you had to bear within this life, Allah will reward you for it in the next life. So you bear with it patiently, and you realize that this world is nothing but a seedbed for the hereafter. It's a time of toil, it's a time of plowing, and then in the hereafter, you reap the rewards. And so by repeating that statement, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, over and over and over again, and keeping it on the forefront of your mind, and the forefront of your heart, I should say, Allah will shower you with His mercy and His pleasure. And that is the logic of slavehood. When you truly understand that you are a slave, you will find yourself in a state of surrender and submission. And that's a very healthy, or the healthiest way to look at the world, to understand that I'm a slave and there are things that are beyond my control. And you just leave it and you don't stress about it. But then he moves on to something else. And he moves on to the logic of love. The logic of love. And he says, when you waken your heart to the remembrance of Allah and His various attributes, and then you contemplate Allah's favors towards you, and you realize that the world's adversities, right, all the trials and tribulations that you suffer in this world are nothing compared to Allah's blessings that He bestows upon you. And you understand that in this life, the basic truth of it is this. This is what has been engraved on the sheet of paper that is this life, which is this. The blessings that come to you via human hand are nothing more than a manifestation of the attribute of the true bestower of blessings. Allah is the true mun'im. So any blessing that comes your way is, if you think about it from a human, it's coming from another human being, it's actually from Allah, right? It's like, so if you read in Surah Al-Taha, something it's the third page in, it's like ayah 36, something like this, where Allah says to Musa, He says, Al-Qaytu alayka muhabbatin minni, right? Allah says, I showered you with my love. I sent down to you love from me. This is Surah Al-Taha. Okay, so what does this love mean? And so you look at the tafsir, for example, Imam Ahmad Zuhaydi, rahimahullah, in his tafsir, he says the nature of Musa alayhi salam was that everyone who saw him loved him. Right? He says to Musa, that's what he's saying to Musa alayhi salam, basically, right? Everyone who saw you loved you, even Fir'aun loved you. Right? That was how Allah showed His mercy to Musa alayhi salam, because he was shown love by the creation. Everyone who saw him loved him. Even Fir'aun, even someone with a wretched heart like Fir'aun loved him. And this is the logic of love. So, an understanding that whatever good comes your way, again, it may on the surface comes from a human being, but it's actually coming from Allah, right? And this is why I think we talked about this before. We talked about, I think we've mentioned this before, like gratitude lists. I think we've mentioned this before, where if you feel you're in a rut and you feel kind of sad or depressed about anything, if you actually were to take the time to write down at the end of the day, say 10 things that you're grateful for, whatever they may be, just write down 10 things that you're grateful for. And obviously, on the first day, you might write down you will probably write down the major things that you can think about. Okay, my faith, my family, my job, my house, and so on and so forth. But as the days go on, you might write down some of the little things, right? Like so and so was nice to me today. So and so smiled at me today. So and so opened a door for me. So and so gave me directions. And you realize, but then you have to realize all these kindnesses that people are showing you are ultimately coming from where? They're coming from Allah. That's Allah showing you kindness. Allah is sending people your way to show you kindness. So then again, he says the perfection that is apparent in the planning of any production or the appearance of any creation is nothing other than a reflection of his attribute of perfection. Right? So you see anything in the world that you marvel at, any sort of modern invention, and you think, oh, wow, that's amazing. Well, who actually made that? So ultimately, Allah made that. Right? You can look at a Boeing 767 and think, wow, that's an amazing invention. Look at that plane. It's like, well, who actually made it? Who gave those people the ilham? Who inspired them to make that? It's Allah. Anything perfect you see that's from Allah's creation. The beauty, and he says about the beauty as well. Anything that you see is beautiful ultimately goes back to Allah's beauty. And then he says the knowledge that you exalt in your heart, again, is nothing but a gift from the knower of the unseen. Right? Whatever knowledge you have, the knowledge that you cherish, that's from Allah's knowledge. So once you awaken your heart, or if you awaken your heart to these great realities, you live with them for a period of time, then you come under the influence of an unshakable love for the Lord of the heavens and the earth. For your heart is attached to these attributes. And then you will take your heart to the source of these attributes, which is Allah, and you will gather all your desires into one heart. So you look at everything around you, and then you remember who created all of this. Right? And I'll mention this again. I mentioned this before, the book on depression and anxiety that we've been working on, which inshallah we'll be publishing later. It's another based on a series by Imam Ramadan. He talks about this dhikr, right? Like when you're in a true state of dhikr, every time you see beauty, you remember. When you see jamal, you remember Allah's jamal. You remember Allah's jamil. When you see anything that surprises you, anything that amazes you, anything that pleases you, you remember who created it. So being a true state of dhikr is where everything reminds you of Allah. Everything reminds you of Allah, and that brings peace to your heart. That brings felicity to your heart. That will remove stress and anxiety and depression, all these things. And then he says, you will then become intoxicated by this love, and you'll have intimate conversations with the sole object of your love, speaking to him from the depths of your heart. Right? So now you move into having munajat, like this intimate conversation with Allah. And he gives an example. He says, my soul had scattered desires, but I gathered them together when my eye saw you, i.e. Allah. The one whom I envied started to envy me, and I became the master of the mortals when you became my master. I've left the people to their world and their affairs because I am busy remembering you. You are my religion and my world. You see, when the idea there is, you think about when you move away from people and you focus on Allah, then everyone looks at you like, what's with him? He's not really concerned about anyone else. It's like, no, because he's only concerned with Allah. He's not expecting anything from people. He's only looking to Allah. He knows that everything comes from Allah, and then everything goes back to Allah. And at that point, you will no longer feel a difference between the agony of the afflictions you suffer and the pleasure of the blessings that you enjoy, as long as both are stamped with divine wisdom and will. And this is, again, he's saying what allows you at that point is once you're in that state, you're allowed to deal with you see the blessings and the tribulations as the same. This is a very high maqam he's talking about. We're in a situation where you can see the blessings and tribulations as the same. You realize they're both from Allah. And Allah has commanded me to do the appropriate action in each one, to be patient and to be grateful. Indeed, it is the nature of the lover to submit happily to what his beloved decrees for him, for by doing so, he is able to express his love for him and his attachment to him. So, I was reading this earlier. This paragraph where he says, "Is by the nature of the lover to submit happily to what his beloved decrees for him, for by doing so, he is able to express his love for him and his attachment to him." And you get to think. I think or one thing that comes to mind, I would say, is the Messenger of Allah sallallahu, there was something he said to his companions that Allah is more merciful to his slaves than a mother is to a child. Right? He's arham. right? He's more so than a mother to her child. And when you think about the comparison, when you think about like the way a child is very much like it's a perfect analogy, because a child, especially a baby, right? Because human beings are unique. Human beings are different in the sense that if you look at animals, for example, a lot of animals when they're born, they just get up and walk away, right? Human beings don't do that. A baby is a completely and utterly helpless state for years, right? Can't really move around. Is completely and utterly dependent. Completely and utterly dependent. Needs to be fed, needs to be changed, everything. Completely dependent. And at the same time, the baby doesn't understand a lot of things. All right, the baby doesn't understand. Okay, why is my dad doing that? Why is my mom doing that? Why are they sleeping? Why are they feeding me? Why are they playing with me? Where's my dad going? Right? And you think about it, we're kind of like that with Allah, because we need Allah, and we think there are things that we need, but we don't understand the wisdom behind things. And therefore, like a baby, we can do the same thing in our own way. We can cry, we can scream, we can say, why is this happening? But it's like, no, the same way that parents towards a child, what they're doing is out of love. Everything they're trying to do out of love, whether the father, it's the father going out to work, it's the mother trying to cook something, it's the mother trying to sleep, both parents trying to sleep because they need the energy to do things for their child. The baby doesn't understand that. So the baby cries like, well, how come no one's here? How come no one's feeding me? How come no one's doing this? How come I'm not getting what I want? We can't be like that with Allah, you see, crying and screaming and kicking when things don't go our way. We have to understand that no, everything is based on love. It's based on love. We submit to what our beloved Allah has decreed for us. And then he talks about the prophets and the truly sincere, the Siddiqeen. They lived with these feelings. The people of Allah went through their worldly lives with these feelings, immersed in afflictions and pains without even feeling them. Right? They went through adversities, but they were able to detach and say, okay, this is from Allah. I don't need to overreact. I don't need to be grieved. I don't need to be sad. This is from Allah, and I should be patient with it. And they wouldn't become annoyed or fed up. No trial became severe for one of these lovers, except that his heart increased in love and yearning for the one who sent down the trial. See? It's like the trial doesn't push them away from Allah, it actually draws them closer to Allah, and they yearn for Allah. And then for example, he says, the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he felt agony from every side at the point of death, he was immersed in intimate conversation with his Lord. He was saying, oh Allah, take me to the highest companion, right? Al-Rafiq al-A'la. That's what he was calling for. Mu'adhim and Jabal as well. When the agony of death was severe, every time he would wake up, he would sort of come to, he like regain consciousness for a minute. He would open his eyes and he would say, oh Lord, hasten my death. For by your might, you know that my heart loves you. You know that my heart loves you. Right? I'm at this point of death, but you know that my heart loves you. I just, he's not angry at Allah for what he's going through. He just wants to be with Allah. That's it. Imran ibn Hussein, again, tests with a chronic illness that left him bedridden on a bed of stripped palm fibers for almost 30 years, until his flesh melted away and his bones grew feeble. His brother visited him once and wept, so he said, why do you weep? He replied, because of the severe state that you are in. Right? His brother saw him and was weeping because of the state that Imran ibn Hussein was in. And Imran said, do not weep, because whatever is most beloved to Allah is most beloved to me. So Imam al-Buti continues, it says, if you just had a speck of this solicitude, or if Allah ennobled you with just a speck of this solicitude, this concern and this care, or bequeathed you just some of the blessings of this love, your anxieties and basic inclinations would be effaced. They'd be erased from your soul, and your heart would be immersed in unshakable pleasure that can only be described by those whom Allah, the Exalted, has honored by allowing them to taste it. Right? Because all the delights of this world do not match the delight of divine love once it is taken over your heart. And this goes back, there's a famous, it's not mentioned here, there's a statement by a great wali of Allah from the first 3 generations, Ibrahim ibn Adam. He made a statement like this, because he said that if the kings and the princes and the rulers in their palaces, if they knew what we had, they would fight us for it. They would take up their swords and fight us for it, meaning that they knew the joy that we have by being in a state of dhikr with Allah, a state of remembering Allah, a state of making dua to Allah, having this proximity to Allah, and they're chasing their pleasure with whatever, with music and eating and dancing, whatever. They would fight us for what we have. Right? They would fight. They don't understand. If they understood, that's what they would do. And he goes on to say that he said, when someone is inundated with this love, the lover can be swept away into states that are outside of his will and control. So now we're talking about what some people refer to as like wedged. Like someone can be so ecstatic in the state that they might say certain extreme things, right? Such as announcing that one could do without the paradise or its blessings, or that one does not care about the fire and its punishment. And this is because his heart is turned away from the pleasures of this life, right? His heart is at a higher state, and is attached to Allah's essence and this overwhelming desire to meet him. Thus, he only wants the blessing of being near to his master and the pleasure of gazing at his noble face. Right? And so that's a very high maqam. That's a very high maqam. And Imam Shafi has a statement like this. For example, Imam Shafi said that he only worshiped Allah. He said that he would only worship Allah because there's a statement where he was asked about seeing Allah in the hereafter, right? There's the ayah in Surah Al-Mutaffifin, ayah 15, where Allah says, the 83rd chapter of ayah 15, where Allah says, Kalla innahum an rabbihim yawmaydhin lamahjubun. Like indeed on that day, they'll be veiled from their Lord. So Imam Shafi, he used what's called in usul fiqh mafhum mukhalafa, right? Negative implication. He said there's some people on that day who are veiled from Allah, out of Allah's wrath, Allah's anger, then obviously there'll be another group of people who will see Allah out of his pleasure and out of his mercy. And his student Rabia, he says, "Atadinu bihadi ya Sayyidi, like, is this what you truly believe?" And he said, if Muhammad ibn Idris were not certain that he would see Allah in the hereafter, he wouldn't worship him in the dunya. Right? So like Imam Shafi saying that's his maqam. He's worshiping Allah for who he is. The concern is not the paradise, the concern is not the fire. It's worshiping Allah for who he is. That's what it comes down to. Imam Nawawi talks about this as well. In his commentary on the Arba'in Nawawiyah, the first hadith, actions are only by intentions. He talks about that. He says, there are people who worship Allah for different reasons. There are people who worship Allah merely out of fear of punishment. There are people who worship Allah merely out of desire for the paradise. And then there are people who worship Allah for who he is. And that's the highest maqam. That's the highest stage, to worship Allah for who he is. Then he goes on to say, maybe this state of love, this is Imam al-Buti, says, maybe this state of love will cause him to expose himself to Allah, these also trials and tribulations. So this is where it gets a bit extreme, where people might go out of their way to expose themselves to Allah's trials and tribulations. And while undergoing these hardships and suffering from them, he will declare the extent of his love for Allah the Exalted and how extremely pleased he is with everything the Beloved sends his way. So this is where someone's actually going, they're seeking tribulations. And this is why, again, we go back to the ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah 155, that the ayah we read some minutes ago, because Allah said, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ. We're definitely, most assuredly going to test you. So if Allah's told you that, then you don't need to go out of your way to find tests. You don't need to go out of your way to find tribulations. If Allah's told that he's definitely going to test you, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to go out of your way. So that's why he goes on to say, however, perfect etiquette with Allah negates all of this. Rather, those who fall into the state have the excuse that they were overwhelmed, right? This etiquette should not be like this. And if someone does make this statement, we excuse them because we say they were overwhelmed. They were overwhelmed by the love for Allah. So if they go out of their way and look for trials and tribulations, or say that they want trials and tribulations, we excuse them. We say, okay, they're overwhelmed, right? But it's not the proper etiquette with Allah. Because the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who had the greatest love for Allah, he never asked Allah for tribulations. He always asked Allah to relieve him from tribulations. He asked Allah to relieve him from poverty, to relieve him from agony, to relieve him from any sort of suffering. Because that's what we should be doing. And when tribulation came, he was content. That's how we should be. He was content and he anticipated reward. And there's, for example, someone who did this. A poet actually made a supplication like this. He made a dua like this. He said, "Oh Allah, punish me with what you want, apart from being far from you. The most faithful lover is delighted with what pleases you." Right? That's what he said. "Oh Allah, punish me with whatever you want." Okay, and then Allah tested him with bladder stones, which caused him severe agony. And then he would go on the street and give children money, i.e. sadaqah, saying, "Supplicate to Allah on behalf of your uncle who lied." Right? Even he supplicated. He said, "Oh Allah, I love you. Test me with anything. I'll bear with it." And then it became too much. So you don't do that, right? That's not good. That's not good etiquette. But nevertheless, if this blood is controlled by the Sharia, is controlled by the revealed law, it is the peak of high stations and the righteous and people of Allah ascend to, and is the greatest cure for whatever trials and tribulations a person may be exposed to in this life. Right? So you want to have that love for Allah, but it's bridled by the Sharia, right? So you understand that you love Allah because of his tribulations, you love Allah because of his blessings, but you don't go out of your way to start asking for blessing or asking for tribulations or seeking out tribulations. Whereas if you don't have that, as the Imam goes on to say, if you don't have that, then you might start slipping into stress, and you start slipping into looking at other distractions and embellishments and amusements when you face a tribulation. Instead of when you face something difficult, you face a tribulation, instead of turning to Allah, instead of being patient and understanding that this is from Allah and it's out of love and I love Allah and I'll accept this, the tribulations can push you towards being stressed and being anxious and seeking distractions and amusements to get yourself away from this, right? What they call in the West, escapism. You're trying to escape the reality of what's in front of you. Whereas when you love Allah and you're in that high state of loving Allah, you don't do that. You're patient. Now he finishes off this chapter with just one final point, that love is as we should understand it, right? So when Allah says in the Quran to Musa alayhi salam, alqaytu alayka mahabbatan minni, right? Or Allah says in Surah Al-Imran ayah 31, in kuntum tuhibbun Allah fattabi'uni yuhibbukum Allah, right? That if you love me, then follow me. If you love Allah, then follow me, and then Allah will love you. Understand love as love. Don't try to interpret it away as anything. So he said there are some people who claim that loving Allah is nothing more than obeying him. Okay, and they'll argue with you about this. So if you love Allah, that's just because you obey him, right? You pray 5 times a day, you fast the month of Ramadan, you stay away from alcohol and pork, and that's it. You love Allah. Done. But he says no, and he says this is not true at all, because no, love it's a feeling. For us human beings, is a feeling. We feel the love of Allah. And he says it's very odd that these people who say that love should be interpreted, when we see the word hub in the Quran, and that's another book that's in the pipeline, by the way, al-hub fi the Quran. When you see love in the Quran, these people say you should interpret it away. You should interpret it away to mean, it just means obedience. It just means devotion to Allah, staying away from the haram, sticking to the halal, doing your obligations. Yet, when it comes to things like Ar-Rahman al-Arsh istiwa, these kind of ayat, and sort of ayah 5, no, those are literal. You have to understand those ones literally, right? It's a complete contradiction, right? And so they're happy to accept anthropomorphism in this regard, but then they're going to say that no, hub needs to be interpreted away, right? That makes no sense whatsoever. So, whereas our understanding is no, when we look at Ar-Rahman al-Arsh istiwa, we don't understand that literally. We understand istiwa in a way that befits Allah. We affirm istiwa, and we believe in it, and Allah knows best what it means, and we affirm it for Allah. But love is love. Love is not just obeying him, because he says, and if loving Allah is just obeying him, then why did Mu'adh bin Jabal say, by your might, you know my heart loves you, right? This is a heart beating. This is not just obedience. This is a slave's heart beating with love for Allah. And then he says as well on the page before that, he said the intensity of one's love is, and its prevalence in the heart will determine whether one's obedience increases or decreases. Were it not for this fact, the companions would not have been different in their acts of obedience and their bearings with hardship, even though it is known that they are equal in the foundation of faith. Because you can have people, again, you have people who are equal in the sense of that they're all obeying Allah, they're all doing what they're supposed to do, and they're all avoiding the haram things, but the levels of love are different. So love is not just a simple case of obedience to Allah. It's a feeling within the heart for us human beings. And that's why we have to take ourselves further. Okay, and that's why he says, what's quite astonishing, the same people who deny that there's any figurative language in the Quran and prohibit interpretation, i.e. ta'wil, such as in statements like Ar-Rahman al-Arsh istiwa, Yad Allahi fawqa aydihim, right? which if you understood those ayat literally, right, it would be to anthropomorphism, but they rush to interpret who love him to mean obedience and obeying commands, and that's it. But those who understand divine love are those whose hearts have tasted it. As for the one for whom the religion is just thoughts that remain locked up in his mind, let his heart remain devoted to the various manifestations and desires of this worldly life, and let him indulge freely therein. It is very likely that he knows nothing about the reality of divine love and the effect on the heart. So again, and we'll finish on this point here. It's very, very important to take ourselves out of thinking about Islam, because again, if love of Allah, if that's just obeying Allah, then we get into this situation where we can slip to this mindset where we think of Islam, we don't think of Allah, we think of Islam instead, and we think of it as just a list of do's and don'ts, right? And we have to be careful with the language we use, like Islam says do this, Islam says don't do that. And then it's like, okay, so are you in a relationship with Allah, or are you just following a legal code? Because again, you can see people like this in your life who have that understanding where they just want the clear cut. They think that the Quran is like an instruction manual. Do this, don't do that. Get this, don't get that. Avoid this, stay with this, stick with this. And what you find is that the heart is kind of dead. It's just really dry. It's jaff. There's nothing going on there. And these people can be people caught up in that mindset. They can be very, very miserable because there's no sweetness to their faith. There's no personal relationship with Allah. It's just a relationship with the law code. It's following do's and don'ts. And it's not actually bringing anything out of them. It's not inspiring anything out of them. So they're not having a personal relationship with Allah, where they're turning to Allah as they should be. For example, being patient with tribulation, being grateful in times of tribulation, making lots of dua to Allah. They're not building on that at all. It's just following the do's and don'ts, keeping it very, very simple, and it's very, very dry. And we ask Allah for refuge from that. We want to be in a loving relationship with Allah. Allah wants every success. Alhamdulillah. So I'll open the floor now for questions, inshallah.